NASA says that, right at this point, it is a great fundamental chance to concentrate on the world Venus. This follows the new discoveries of possible life on the planet. If you wind up analyzing NASA's records from the 1960s, you'd see the space organization considering Venus a planet of judgment. Meanwhile, Mars became our primary objective. Such precise naming of the main planets wasn't common during the wild space race period. The Soviet Union was focused on sending missions to Venus. The stunning planet showed essentially no potential for life. Yet the Soviet space program didn't decommission the Venera program until the fall of the USSR. According to deGrasse Tyson, we now finally understand the reason why. Join us as we examine the declassified photographs from Venus taken by the Soviet Union. The fall of the Soviet Union was significant in more ways than one. Not only did it impact the world's overall structure, but the USSR's collapse also locked away many secrets. The truth is, the Soviets had a deep inclination toward keeping secrets, from running the fastest intelligence organization in the world to being secretive about their true capabilities. This suggests that extraterrestrial contact was one of those privileged secrets. The former superpower holds many untold mysteries. Before the U.S. surpassed all planetary missions in space, the Soviet Union was leading the game. While the U.S. and USSR had a long history of both successful and failed space missions, their primary focus was on the hostile planet Venus. In the Russian language, Venus is called Venera, which was also the name of the mission that lasted from 1961 to 1983. During this time, the U.S. was focused on sending missions to the moon. In a way, the Soviets chose to use their resources elsewhere. We can't say that the entire fascination with the second planet from our sun is odd. Did the Soviets want to use the planet's surface as a potential power station? Or were they perhaps hoping to colonize it, searching for any signs of development beneath the surface? That remains the question. Why were the Soviets so focused on this inhospitable planet? Since they conducted these missions during the Cold War, they weren't entirely open about their objectives. In fact, everything we know about the Venusian missions comes from declassified and unarchived data. After so much effort pinpointing what the Soviets were actually looking for, and whether they ever uncovered Venus secrets, we should note that the Soviets didn't land on Venus just once or even twice, but repeatedly. That's right. The Soviets launched 28 expensive rockets toward the planet. Additionally, 13 of those entered Venus' atmosphere, while 8 successfully landed. Such complex missions put the Soviets in a leading position in space exploration. Sure, the U.S. was a close second, but NASA was more focused on satellites and innovative technology than on searching for life on other planets. Their attention was on Mars, which, in turn, wasn't particularly unusual or entirely wrong. Your history class probably won't tell you this, but the Soviet space program was the first to send a probe into the atmosphere of a planet other than Earth. It also had another series of firsts to its name. The USSR became the first country to achieve a soft landing on another planet, returning images and sounds from its surface. The Soviets had their own one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind moment long before the U.S. So, why do we only occasionally hear about such achievements? Well, remember what we said about the Soviet tendency to keep secrets? That's just one of many reasons for the oversight of the Soviet space program. In 1992, the renowned agency was decommissioned following the collapse of the USSR, and the program had to be revived under a new Russian identity, Roscosmos. Many of its original records were either lost or destroyed. This is precisely why we don't have a clear answer as to why the Soviets launched 28 rockets into Venus' atmosphere. Still, we can make the most reasonable assumption. Perhaps the Soviet decision to explore Venus was more about cost-effectiveness than anything else. That's not to say the space program didn't recognize the planet's true potential. They were searching for viable water levels, sunlight radiation, and the planet's overall characteristics. Without a series of these space missions, it would have been incredibly difficult to assess Venus' high temperatures and dense atmosphere. Today, many astronomers doubt that the hostile planet could support life. The temperatures there are high enough to melt lead, and water is scarce. Additionally, due to its thick atmosphere, The air pressure on Venus is approximately 90 times that of Earth. Nonetheless, there are still ongoing advancements, and disregarding the USSR's contribution to Venus research is a distortion of history. As far as the Soviets were concerned, Venus was worth studying, while exploring more hospitable planets, such as Mars, wasn't entirely unrealistic. It was far more expensive than sending probes to Venus. Ultimately, it all comes down to distance. On average, Venus is only 40 million kilometers away from Earth, while Mars is about 250 million kilometers away. Such vast differences in distance result in huge differences in cost. Had the U.S. not been the world's largest economy, it might have never even explored Mars. Various reports suggest that Soviet missions were dangerous and had significant technical flaws. Clearly, their rockets couldn't cover enormous distances, and the organization had a poor track record of losing contact with its probes. So, it makes sense why the Soviet space program chose a more practical and relatively closer mission that would yield results. However, we don't often think about the space race in this context. The story of the Venera missions would be incomplete without considering the rivalry between the U.S. and USSR. The U.S. wasn't even a dominant player in space exploration when the Soviet program launched the first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, in 1957. This move kickstarted the space race and maintained its momentum. What's particularly fascinating is why the U.S. focused on the Moon instead of Venus. NASA faced a series of failures with its Venus missions in the 1960s, leading to what became known as the Venus Curse. Each time they launched a probe into Venus' atmosphere, it failed. This was precisely when the Soviet Union saw a remarkable opportunity to capitalize on NASA's failures. At the time, both the U.S. and the USSR were determined to win the space race. The best strategy was to seize two specific opportunities. It was a quiet yet undeniable tactic. The Soviet space program claimed Earth's sister planet as its first victory in the space race, accomplishing something its rival had failed to do. Despite the Soviet Union's limited resources and unstable government, nothing could match its relentless pursuit of space exploration goals. They repeatedly launched missions to Venus to maintain their lead over the U.S., in contrast to NASA's focus on the Moon. This strategic decision wasn't without controversy. Sharp rhetoric and media campaigns were used to obscure their major failures with Venus. The American government was prompted to question the USSR's focus on the planet, with the media branding Venus as the malevolent planet, while Mars was hailed as mankind's future. Despite their significant achievements, the Venera missions are often overshadowed by the moon landings and the race to Mars. However, their contributions to planetary science cannot be overstated. The Soviet probes provided the first direct measurements of Venus' atmosphere, revealing its extreme conditions, crushing pressure, scorching temperatures, and thick clouds of sulfuric acid. These findings reshaped our understanding of Venus and solidified its reputation as a hellish world. One of the most remarkable moments in space exploration occurred in 1975 when Venera 9 became the first mission to successfully transmit images from the surface of another planet. The grainy black-and-white photographs revealed a rocky, desolate landscape beneath a thick, overcast sky. Venera 13 and Venera 14, launched in 1981, captured even clearer images and recorded audio from the planet's surface. The eerie sounds of Venus winds, transmitted back to Earth, marked another first in human history. While these missions confirmed that Venus was an inhospitable world, they also deepened the mystery. Why had Venus, so similar to Earth in size and composition, become a scorching wasteland? Could it have once been habitable? These questions continue to drive modern research. The decline of Soviet Venus exploration. As the Cold War neared its end, funding for space exploration in the Soviet Union began to dwindle. The last successful Venera mission, Venera 16, launched in 1983, conducted detailed radar mapping of Venus' surface. By this time, the Soviet Union's priorities had shifted, and with its eventual collapse in 1991, the once dominant space program fell into decline. The final Soviet Venus mission, Vega, in 1985, attempted a more ambitious approach. The twin Vega 1 and Vega 2 spacecraft deployed landers and balloon probes into Venus' atmosphere, providing new insights into its cloud dynamics. However, after these missions, Soviet Venus exploration came to an end. The U.S. returns to Venus. For decades, NASA largely ignored Venus in favor of Mars, seeing it as a more promising candidate for exploration and potential colonization. However, recent discoveries, such as the possible detection of phosphine gas, a potential biosignature in Venus clouds, have reignited interest in Earth's twin. In response, NASA has announced new missions, including Da Vinci Plus and Veritas, aimed at studying Venus' atmosphere and geology in unprecedented detail. Meanwhile, other space agencies, including ESA, European Space Agency, and ISRO, Indian Space Research Organization, are also planning their own Venus missions. Even private space companies have expressed interest in exploring the planet. The unfinished business of Venus exploration. Despite these renewed efforts, many questions remain unanswered. Could Venus have supported life in the distant past? If so, what caused its transformation into a planetary furnace? Could microbial life still exist in its upper atmosphere? Some scientists propose that Venus was once covered in vast oceans and had a stable climate for billions of years, perhaps even longer than Mars. If true, Venus might not just be Earth's evil twin, but a cautionary tale of what could happen if a planet's climate spirals out of control. The future? Will we return? The Soviet Union's dedication to Venus exploration laid the groundwork for much of what we know today. Although overshadowed by the Moon and Mars, Venus remains an intriguing world, one that may hold the secrets to planetary evolution and habitability. As technology advances, we may one day see crewed missions to Venus, perhaps not to its surface but to its upper atmosphere, where conditions are more Earth-like. Concepts such as floating cities or research stations in the Venusian clouds have been proposed, offering a vision of a future where humanity expands its reach beyond Mars. Conclusion: the Venera missions were a testament to Soviet ingenuity, persistence, and ambition. Despite the extreme challenges, the Soviets accomplished what no other nation had at the time: landing probes on Venus and transmitting data from its surface. Their efforts remain one of the most underappreciated achievements in space exploration. As new missions prepare to revisit Venus, we are reminded that the story of Earth's sister planet is far from over. The questions left unanswered by the Soviets decades ago still drive scientific curiosity today. Perhaps in the near future, we will finally uncover the true history of Venus and its place in our cosmic neighborhood. Thinking back to the 1950s, the Soviets started testing their plans. Also, over the following 30 years, they proceeded to fabricate and launch interplanetary rockets as a component of the Venera program. Since the program ran alongside the Cold War, the Soviets focused on improving their resources. Luckily for them, the early years of the conflict provided them with more resources than the U.S., which turned out to be incredibly significant. It allowed them to build larger rockets designed to break through high altitudes and cover vast distances. The Soviets rushed to experiment with both manned and unmanned rockets, while the Soviet academic community worked on a series of calculations and assessments to chart precise courses for the Venus missions. Behind the scenes, their Mars programs were also running. Nothing was more important than developing advanced instrumentation for these missions. This led to major breakthroughs in the history of space exploration. In 1966, the Soviet Union launched Venera 3, making it the first artificial probe to enter Venus' atmosphere and successfully land on the planet's surface. This achievement escalated the competition between the two superpowers. Unlike the American missions, which were plagued by failures and setbacks, the Soviet program continued to make progress. Despite their successes, the USSR managed to send successful probes into Venus' atmosphere. The main challenge with this approach was the limited design capabilities. However, the Soviets quickly overcame their design issues and launched the most sophisticated probes of the Venera program during the 1970s. Their pioneering efforts allowed them to achieve the first simultaneous launches of Venera 4 and Venera 5. According to most historians, This was one of the most remarkable decades in the history of space exploration. Certainly, the U.S. attempted to develop similar launch methods. So why did the Soviet program choose simultaneous launches into Venus? To understand this, one must recognize that interplanetary travel requires advanced instrumentation to collect the highest level of data and evidence. The probes were initially launched to study the planet's surface, and that is exactly what happened with Venera. Since the launch was successful, the probe entered Venus' atmosphere. The Soviet program continued with Venera 5, but this wasn't just a repeat of the first launch. The second probe was specifically designed to gather detailed information about the planet. Ultimately, Venera 7, the last successful launch, made history by becoming the first spacecraft to land safely on Venus. The entire mission represented an extraordinary competition between the Soviet Union and the U.S. The Cold War space race never slowed down. The success of Venera 7 was a great achievement. It became the first space vehicle to send back messages from Venus' surface, an accomplishment that had eluded NASA and other space agencies. It transmitted data for over 23 minutes before losing contact, which was remarkable given the planet's extreme conditions. This victory was part of the USSR's broader strategy to showcase its superiority in space exploration while the U.S. was focused on its moon missions. However, the Soviet triumphs did not come without challenges. While the Venera probes were crucial to Venus exploration, they also faced significant difficulties. For instance, Venus' harsh conditions, its dense atmosphere, extreme heat, and crushing pressure, made it difficult to maintain communication and keep the probes operational for extended periods. Despite these hardships, the Soviets continued their missions. In 1975, Venera 9 successfully sent back the first black-and-white images from Venus' surface, further cementing the USSR's leadership in planetary exploration. The Soviet space program's work on Venus wasn't just about surpassing the U.S. It was also about gathering essential scientific data. The Venera probes helped establish that Venus had a surface temperature of around 465 degrees Celsius, 869 degrees Fahrenheit. Incredibly hot for any Earth-like life to exist. The probes also confirmed that Venus' atmosphere was primarily composed of carbon dioxide, with clouds of sulfuric acid, making it one of the most hostile environments in the solar system. Despite this harsh climate, some scientists have continued to speculate about the possibility of life in Venus' upper cloud layers, where conditions might be more temperate. Recent discoveries, such as the detection of phosphine gas in Venus' atmosphere, have reignited interest in the planet. This has led to renewed efforts by space agencies like NASA, ESA, and Russia to launch new missions to Venus as scientists seek to learn more about its history and whether life ever existed there. The Venera program, now largely forgotten in popular memory, was a pioneering effort that provided much of the earliest substantial data about Venus. The Soviet Union's commitment to these missions demonstrated its determination in the space race and its technological achievements in planetary exploration. It laid the foundation for future missions to both Venus and other planets. With the collapse of the USSR and the end of the Venera program, Venus exploration slowed down. NASA's focus shifted to Mars, and much of the academic community turned its attention elsewhere. However, as we look to the future, Venus may once again take center stage. With new advancements and international collaboration, the secrets of this hostile planet may yet reveal more hidden insights, ones that could change our understanding of life in the universe.